Yeah. That was pretty good, right? New intro. Sounded awesome. I'm really happy with the way that turned out. Oh, I got the stupidest smile on my face right now. This podcast is growing legs, people. Yeah. Looking professional. So, yeah, that was an intro my good friend, Denver Powell created for me. I gave him an idea of what I wanted, and he put it together, and he did an awesome job. I'm so excited for it. So, yeah, that's going to be the intro from now on. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are too. Yeah, so today it is Your Forest Podcast, episode 4. Thanks for checking it out. Today's going to be a little bit different. I've invited a guest on today. His name is Michael Gubbels. He is a Indigenous policy coordinator for the government of Alberta. So he's got a lot to talk about. He's got a really interesting story. Lots of really interesting stories, actually. And yeah, he's a really honest guy, and he's really, really humble about his experience, and he kind of lays it all out. And I first met him at a workshop for AAFMP, which is the Alberta Association of Forest Management Professionals. That's our regulated body. And he gave a really good talk explaining kind of the relationship between forest industry and Aboriginal culture, and just Aboriginal culture in general and the history behind that and some of the trauma that's experienced and other things. So I wanted to have him on, and I'm really happy they took my took up my invitation, because I wasn't sure. I'm just throwing a dart, right? I'm hoping I get somebody that really wants to come on and talk, because you never know. Some people don't want to speak about their profession, right? There's especially something like Aboriginal culture, right? Like it's a touchy subject. Not a lot of people know it, so it's I'm glad you're on. It's awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for having the guts to have this conversation even.
So, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'll just bring the mic just a little bit closer. It needs to be, just like three or 4 inches off your face. There we go. I want to make sure you're nice and loud. Everyone can hear you.
Sure.
So really let's get right into it. Like, what got you interested into like this kind of work, and what motivates you?
Well, actually, I was, I found out that I was Aboriginal later on in
found
my life.
Out, hey?
Yeah, and it was kind of a shock, and to be honest, it was difficult. I think I had a lot of the preconceived notions that a lot of people have, and I was, to be honest, a little embarrassed about it. So, life went on, and I got educated as an engineer, and I was working in electrical engineering industry. And then I guess I just started having I don't know what you could consider it, like a little bit of an epiphany or an awakening in my life, and
for sure
seeing some other aspects that I didn't know earlier, looking at issues of the environment and politics and history and everything, and I felt a strong desire to go back to school. And not even worrying about what I would do as a career or for a job, and just go to learn and see what I was passionate about. And that led me to studying anthropology. And through that, though, I was looking for scholarships and some assistance, and there was a couple awards. The Belcourt Brasso Métis Award was a scholarship for Métis people going to study anything,
right?
And so I was looking at accessing some of that for my schooling, and they all asked, they always ask, what is my participation in the Aboriginal community? So I didn't have any, so I was kind of forced to look for opportunities to go volunteer and participate. And at Grant MacEwan, where I was studying, there was an Aboriginal student association, and I just walked into there to basically satisfy requirements for a scholarship.
Gotcha.
And it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, because I started learning about the culture more, and all of my misconceptions and myths were being undone. And When I first walked into their office, I was looking behind my shoulder, seeing who's looking at me, because then, it's like the secret's out. Now everyone knows I'm Aboriginal, and, I was dealing with a lot of shame and about that. And it's just funny because after 2 years of studying there, like that was the furthest feeling that I had. That shame was totally replaced with an appreciation of the culture and the history. It changed my life around. Just being able to work with elders and listening to their lessons and realize what I thought I knew about Aboriginal culture was completely wrong. So
that's amazing. Yeah, it's awesome that you're willing to tell that story, because that's not something that, I think that's a feeling that some people might have in our society, right? Where they just not knowing, right? The ignorance of a culture and not being involved in it, and like how do you don't know, right? You just hear all the slang and all the
jokes,
all the jokes and all the dumb things that people say, right? That's all you really get. And yeah, you never really get the truth of it. And I think that's true for a lot of people, right? So to have someone like you who realize late in life that they are Aboriginal is and go through that experience, that's wild. That's pretty. I'm glad you're open enough to say that. That's brave. Yeah, that's great.
Well, I hope others can learn. I suppose it's a common story that I hear. A lot of people grow up with that shame, and they don't get the opportunities to unlearn what they know.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm
what they
I'm
think
grateful.
They know, I guess.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of the history, it makes sense that people don't know, because there's a lot of government policy that banned ceremonies, and residential schools kind of took away the language from a lot of people. So a lot of cultural ideas and in their sciences and arts and music and politics, everything that made up their culture, a lot of it was lost. So it's
that's brutal.
not surprising that a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's no, I don't. I can claim ignorance myself. I don't know a lot. I grew up in Slave Lake. There's a lot of reserves around. Like, I grew up with a lot of Aboriginal people. I have a lot of Aboriginal friends, but even them, they're a little bit. Some of them are a little bit distant from their culture, right?
Yeah.
So some of them that are still involved, I actually want to get more involved in myself and maybe go to a powwow or go just experience it, right? Because it's never anything I've been a part of. So I've been around the people, but not really, I don't think, right? It seems like the culture is still hidden to me. So I'm interested to open that door, right?
Cool, yeah.
No.
Well, the powwow is a really powerful and amazing opportunity to see the beauty of the culture, and kind of step outside maybe the dominant narrative that you might hear on the news about a lot of the social issues and difficulties and barriers and things like that. So it's nice to be able to just see another side and experience kind of the music,
the happiness,
and
right?
Yeah, and the energy, and
I grew up in Slave Lake. We had I know they had a lot of what was his name? I forget. But there was a famous dancer who used to come to our school pretty often, and he would come in and do hoop dances, right? That's
sure,
right.
Yeah,
hoop dances and that kind of stuff. And it was like it's fascinating to watch the colors and the flair and it's cool, right? I don't see enough of it as an adult. I wish I'd seen more of it, right? I didn't at the time as a child. I didn't appreciate it, but now I see the kind of the allure there, right? So it's cool.
Yeah. Treat for the senses, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly, totally. It makes sense. Yeah. You actually just mentioned residential schools, and if you want to just kind of talk about that a little bit, because I don't know, a lot of people might not know. I knew of them. I didn't know a lot about them, the extent of them. So if you want to talk about that a little bit,
sure.
Feel free.
Yeah, well, so for many years, Canadian policy regarding Aboriginal people was to assimilate them into the dominant Canadian body, I guess. So it was the Indian Act had a lot of, I guess, laws and legislation to make it difficult to practice culture. It was illegal to have a sweat lodge. It was illegal to have like a sun dance or a potlatch or all these cultural ceremonies that were very important to the communities. But even then, they found that the government found that it was taking too long to assimilate the people. It was decided that residential schools would be a way to accelerate assimilation through taking children away. So, for several generations, it was the law for Aboriginal families to send their children away to residential school. And at these schools, they weren't allowed to speak their language. You hear a lot of stories about some harsh punishment, even if they did speak their language, even though they didn't know English. A lot of them, when they first went in,
Right.
There was, I guess, an overall teaching that their culture was evil, and their spirituality was actually praying to the devil, and
non-Christian values.
Yeah, exactly. They were taught that their culture was primitive, kind of like a caveman or Stone Age people, compared to the modern European way of life. And so they have all these they grow up with all these I guess in this environment, and then a lot of it holds, a lot of it takes, and they start feeling that shame about their own culture, about their own people, and then they'd go home in the summertime. So they're away in residential school for 10 months out of the year, and they go home in the 2 months in the summer, and they couldn't even communicate with their families. They thought, if anything, most of them thought that their parents were backwards and stupid, and why are you still following this way? So they had a very dismal look on their own communities, families, and history and all that.
So confusing. It's just
and so they basically they don't have they've lost their identity, because there wasn't it's not like dominant Canadian society was welcoming these people with open arms either. And this, among other situations at residential school, like physical abuse and sexual abuse, and even just poor education, poor funding for residential schools meant like a lot of the children were malnourished, and there was higher instances of diseases like tuberculosis, and it was just a really terrible place for these children. And they learned a lot of they learned how to survive through being cold and hard and mean, and they didn't get taught what love was. There was no loving parents in their lives that had a connection, the parent child connection that's so important for people when they grow up. So this situation left people kind of reeling and in a lot of pain, and not knowing who they are, kind of hating themselves, hating their families, not feeling welcome in outside their communities and dominant Canadian society. So this led to a lot of mental illness and challenges and addictions, and it's still present to this day. So the last residential school closed in the 90s. So there's a lot of people that are still affected by this, and it turned into an intergenerational effect. So people that did go to the residential schools, they didn't get taught how to raise their kids. They lost all of their traditional teachings on the family. So they didn't know how to raise their own kids. And not to mention, if they were, drinking and suffering from mental illness and addictions,
And how could you not with all that treatment that way, right? Like who wouldn't suffer with those same things if you been sexually abused and malnourished and stripped of your culture and totally just you have nothing left. What are you supposed to do?
Well, yeah, a lot of people were left with a lot of anger and resentment, and tried to kill the pain with drugs and alcohol and whatever. So these unhealthy lives were passed down to their children. And so you see an intergenerational effect of alcoholism and addictions and shame. And you couple that with people not even knowing the source of this. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't until the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out where people started talking about their experiences more.
Mm-hmm.
So people now have an understanding. Youth in a lot of Aboriginal communities are getting to understand why their families have had a lot of suffering
Yeah.
in them. So in the past, they wouldn't talk about it. In the past, within communities, everyone would just stay close-lipped about it, and without that talking, there's it's really hard to heal. So,
of course, yeah.
So at least now with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there's I guess more people like learning about the effects of residential school. Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, like people all across Canada, are learning more about it, and a lot of people are using that information and knowledge to stop the intergenerational trauma that their
Right.
families have been experiencing. So,
Right.
So I kind of see at least things starting to get better and improving, just through that openness and people telling their truth now.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, because it's a difficult thing to try and tell, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard for me even to talk about it.
Yeah, but you're doing a good job. You explained it very well. I really appreciate you going this deep with us, right? This is awesome. People are going to learn. They're going to get so much out of this. I really hope.
Well, there's a lot of information out there, more than what I can just say too in about
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes. I mean, if people really want to know more, you can just look up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada on, just do a Google search, and you can get all their reports, and you can hear from what survivors of the schools have said and what their experiences have been like. You can read about reports from like the RCMP and their role in the schools, and just in the churches. Like, there's just an overwhelming amount of information now out there for people to look into if they're interested.
Yeah.
Or even on YouTube, there's a lot of stuff that like the CBC News put out, or the 8 Fire website with Wob Canoe.
Okay.
All this stuff is a really good resource for people to get more detailed information if they want.
Exactly.
So,
And if you can watch it on a video rather than read it, people are more likely to consume it, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I know I am, definitely.
Yeah.
The internet, it's addictive.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling that. Now that we've gone so deep and we've gotten right into it, maybe we'll dial it back and go to something a little bit easier, just something that I think there's some confusion around. For example, terminology, right? There's so many different terms used. Maybe do you want to explain what's going on there? Which ones
Sure.
are correct and which ones are taboo, which ones are whatever?
Yeah, so this is a very complicated topic as well. There's lots of information out there too, but basically speaking, to start, Columbus came to, what was it, like the Caribbean, and he thought they're all
That's a good question. I'm not actually
from
sure.
India, right? So,
Yeah, exactly. The Indians.
So he called them Indians, and
Yeah.
that seemed to stick for millions and millions of people in North and South America.
Right. Even the government picked it up.
Yeah, exactly. And basically that's like, if it were reversed, and let's say someone from North America were to travel and they hit like Africa,
Yeah.
and they thought, oh, we're in Egypt, and it's like calling all of Europe and all of Africa Egyptians.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even close.
So it's and people, that's changing now. A lot of people don't use that term. It's a legal term still in Canada, so usually in professionally speaking, you would only hear it if it's referred to like the Indian Act or some body of law. But
Right.
But aside from that, you'll hear more now the term Aboriginal, which includes Inuit people from the north. Would include First Nations people who are the original inhabitants of Canada. And it would also include Métis people. So, even those terms, though, are pretty difficult because in Canada you have hundreds of First Nations cultures. So again, trying to call like a Cree person and a Blackfoot person, try to find one name for them, or like a Haida person or Iroquois person, trying to find one name for them. It's like, again, you're saying let's call all European people French. Like it's
right.
So
there's different languages and different everything. Eh? Like it's the culture's
different histories. Yeah. That's right. So, so those, you can really find out a lot about terms if you know somebody Aboriginal, and then you can just ask them, like, admit your ignorance and just say, hey, I'd just like to know, like, what's the best thing I could refer to you as to, be respectful of your culture and your history and your identity and who you are.
And people are scared to ask that question, right? They don't want to look like they're ignorant of the situation, right? Well, it's kind of funny. It's almost like if you were to say Israelis and Palestinians, like, oh, you guys are the same thing. Like, that would be a bit of a problem.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and mind you, it wouldn't be the first question I asked someone if I was meeting them for the first time.
Right.
Yeah, but once you kind of get to know someone, that'd be the best way to figure out your terms, is just ask them.
Right.
But generally speaking, First Nations is a respectful term because it acknowledges that these people were the First Nations here in Canada. And these people would include, all the, people all across Canada that have lived here for just thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
The Inuit are the people living in Hudson's Bay, Northwest Territories,
mm-hmm.
living in the Arctic there. The Métis people, so that's a distinct cultural group of people that was formed when fur traders from Europe came and married into First Nations communities, and then subsequent generations eventually got together and formed their own communities, and they made their own distinct Métis culture, and have their own distinct history as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are basically the general groups. You're hearing more and more the term Indigenous.
Yeah.
And that's synonymous with Aboriginal.
Okay.
So you could use it the same. And in fact, I think people are turning more towards Indigenous now and turning away from Aboriginal.
Okay.
And I think that might be because it helps put things in a global context too. Mm. So, it connects Indigenous peoples all over the world together.
Right.
Because in every continent you'll find Indigenous peoples living still, and you'll find that they're all facing very similar stories of, going and their cultures being endangered and losing their languages, and their children being, educated outside of their own cultural worldviews, and resource companies coming in and, changing the landscape, making it very difficult for these people to survive.
Right.
So it's a very similar story that Indigenous peoples in Canada experience, you'll find around the world.
Yeah. No, for sure. What about the terms like what about Native and Eskimo? Are those both kind of taboo? Or what's the?
Yeah, I wouldn't use again. Eskimo is a word that was given to the Inuit.
Gotcha.
So the Inuit, that's what they call themselves as a people.
Okay.
So I think that means I'm no cultural expert or anything, but I think that means like, we are people. We are Inuit. So that's like.
Gotcha.
Not even like a nationality. That's like how they call like a group of people.
Yeah, we're just these people. Yeah.
Deeper, yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Native, I guess probably wouldn't use that as much either, but there are people that use that and are fine with that. So if I was in a very formal setting, I probably wouldn't use native.
Right.
If I was, let's say, meeting with a band council, and I would see what is the name that they call themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, are they a nation? Maybe they are an Indian band.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what they call themselves still. That still comes up from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're fine with it. And also, like, you might have, like, the native friendship centers. They still use the term native.
Right.
Yeah,
it's just one of those terms where I just wanted to clear up, right? Because it's those things. People don't want to offend people, right?
Yeah.
They want to make sure that they're on the right track, and those are, like, native, especially in my life, was used most of my life, right? So I assume that it was all right, and you just want to make sure that you're not offending somebody by using just, you know, a sound you make with your meat flaps. So
I would probably stick with you know, Indigenous, Aboriginal, you know, First Nation,
yeah,
Métis,
no, that makes sense.
Inuit. I think those are the good ones to go with. And then
Stick
once you get to know people better, then you can get a little deeper on what their identity is from their lens.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's good. I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah.
So you talked a little about like Aboriginal culture and stuff like that. Do you want to maybe explain how the history and the traditions are passed on? Like, I know, like, for example, if we were to go back and look in history and look at the Romans or something like that, if we want to know about the Romans, we read what they wrote, right? They wrote down lots of stuff. They kept good records of everything, so we just read through it. A culture like Aboriginal cultures, especially in Canada, it seems like that's not really the tradition there. So
so they have an oral knowledge system. So that's basically, you know, like telling stories, and then you would pass the stories down from generation to generation. Others, you know, did have more like some material culture that would have writing on it, or record keeping.
Right.
Like the Blackfoot have, sorry, I can't remember the exact name, but they're like buffalo hides with pictures on them, so they know what happened every year. There's a story that they
kind of like hieroglyphs or
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes you have like the Inuit too would have an inukshuk, and they'll build it a certain way, and from there they could learn some things from how that's put together.
You know, inukshuk is the man, right?
Yes,
the
right.
stone
Yeah,
man?
the little rock statue.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you'd also have a lot of stories associated with place. So as you are, you know, walking through the bush, you could see a peak, a mountain, you could see a river, or any type of geological feature, and it could trigger a story. Yeah. So that, you know, the forest could be like a library, basically. Right.
There's a lot of that. Well, I remember Derek, on one of the podcasts we were talking about, he found an erratic, a giant, you know, house-size erratic in the middle of the bush, and he wrote it down, and he went back to his superior and he said, "Here, look, I found this erratic. We should keep that up." And when that forest company was dealing with the local Aboriginal communities, they brought up the fact that, hey, we have this big erratic, this big rock in the middle of nowhere. Anything's important to you? And they're like, "Oh yeah, that's the meeting place. That's an important thing. We need to keep that." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So they ended up putting a giant, kilometer buffer around, or whatever. They didn't cut any trees anywhere near there because they want to protect that culture, right? So little things like that. But like you said, it's not written down. There's no place that forest companies or industry can go and look in the library and find this information. They have to sit down with the Aboriginal communities and talk with the elders and talk with the people and get the real information, right? So that's hard to get because people they feel some animosity, and there's animosity both ways, and they want to get deep into it so every side can get what they need and what they want, and it's difficult.
Yeah, there's a history there. In Canada, all of this knowledge that we're talking about, all these stories, a lot of it was lost. I couldn't even imagine how much. Like in some cultures, probably 90% of their knowledge was lost.
Gone.
Just people don't speak the language anymore.
Yeah.
And then the elders weren't around to teach the children. You know, the kids might be off to residential school or off to foster care or something like that.
There's no passage of knowledge there. Yeah,
that's right. So it really stunted the passage of knowledge. So a lot has been lost now because of, you know, government policy. And so there's a tension there. And also there's some other scientists that would come in and, you know, try and get their knowledge from elders, and the elders would tell them, and then the scientist would go off and write his paper or, you know, make some sort of medicine or do some sort of research on that knowledge and not even acknowledge the source of where he got his information from. Right.
That would be frustrating, of course, because that's where he's getting all the information from. Without that culture, you never have that information. So to not give credit to that is it's troublesome.
So there's that type of history, and that's kind of happening around the world, not just in Canada too.
That's brutal.
And there's also the lack of, I guess, well, there's certain protocols too that you, if you do want to go in, let's say you are somebody from industry and you want to know about a certain bush area that you're looking at harvesting, it'd be advisable to know what the protocols are in getting that information. So, you know, maybe you have to offer some tobacco or some gifts or something like that.
Yeah, and the industry might not know that too, right? And it's part of that ignorance,
like cultural learning,
right? Not knowing. And it's I think my experience in forestry, I grew up in a forestry family, and I hear my parents talk about dealing with Aboriginal groups sometimes, right? And sometimes there's some barriers there that are hard to break through, right? On both sides, right? Like the industry is ignorant of their culture, and the Aboriginal culture is maybe unwilling because they've been burned in the past to deal with industry, right?
Well, there's lack of trust.
Exactly. It's tough. If you don't have the trust, then how are you supposed to create a relationship, a good working relationship, right? So I can imagine it can be frustrating on both sides.
Yeah. I think so. Like, you know, it wasn't until 1952 when like Aboriginal people could even hire a lawyer. So, you know, for years,
really, that's insane.
Yeah, they couldn't make any legal land claims, or if development came in and you know, took away their source of living, like all of a sudden the rivers are silted up and there's a stand of bush that was decimated, and you know, there's no berries in there anymore, and there's no, I don't know, moose maybe that seem to come through there. Like no one came to compensate them and say, well, you know, here's a bunch of money or here's a bunch of berries to feed your family now with. Right. So they're just left.
And it's traditional use, and it's not that, and yes, it's not that the use of wood or the use of those resources are wrong, or that cutting is wrong. It's just that sometimes these cultures require these specific areas for their livelihood, and you don't want to take away their trap lines for traditional use or clothing or whatever. You don't want to take away their hunting grounds for the same reason, right? So the communication is key, right? And I think the forest industry as a whole is starting to realize that a lot, and they've been trying in the past, but I'm not sure. I can't speak to it. I wasn't around in the past, but it seems like, to me at least, that the tide is turning in the right direction, and that both sides are starting to trust a little more, and that maybe that, you know, communication will open up, and we can actually have some good conversations, and we can have sustainable forest management, right? And not temporarily destroy traditional use areas, right? So like, I think you were telling me a little earlier how you heard some stories about someone would come home and after whatever they're working or something like that away from home, they come home and their whole hunting area is cut down, or their whole trap line, or maybe they have medicines in that area from bushes and shrubs and stuff like that, and they come home and that's all gone. And it doesn't mean that it's gone forever, but it is gone for that generation, because it takes, the way that the forest works is that it's when it's cut down with a cut block, right? It's pretending to be a natural disturbance, right? That's kind of what they're going for, right? It's a burn or a windstorm or something, right? So you have a decimation of the trees, of the vegetation, and it's starting new, right? You've got new growth coming up, and because of that, you've totally changed the ecosystem. You've changed what's going on there. You have totally new growth. You're gonna have different plants. You're gonna have different insects. You're gonna have different animals. You're gonna have different everything, right? And it's not saying that after a cut block or something like that the landscape is decimated or it's not good anymore. It's just different than it was,
Yes.
right? And in 60, 80, 100 years, it'll be exactly the way it was before, right? It's just that, but for traditional use purposes, without the consultation, they are now left high and dry without the use of that area.
Yeah.
And they have to go and find another place. They might have to go a long ways, and it can be extremely difficult, right?
Pharmacy now, and they might have the money, to do that. Yeah.
So yeah, these things need to come together. It's not that sustainable forest management and Aboriginal communities can't work together, because their goals really in the end are very similar. Like I said, the forest industry, the foresters I know are some of the most passionate people about the environment and environmental regulation and keeping sustainability alive, right? We want to make sure that the trees are around for our families and Aboriginal cultures. We want to make sure that everything is the way it is, right? We don't want to ruin it. It's a crime, in my opinion, to allow something to go, extinct on a landscape, or to you know what I mean, or deforestation, for example, is for purposes of corporate building or of expansion it's bad taste, right? It's not good. You destroy those parts of the landscapes and the ecosystem as a whole, right? You take one piece out, you can't protect the forest and decimate the plains, right? They all work together, and in order to do good management, in order to do good forest management, we need to be talking to all of the sources, and especially Aboriginal communities, because like you said, that there's that library of information that's available in people's minds, and those elders and all that, and we really want to extract that information for good and make sure that it's utilized and not taken advantage of. We want to make sure that those communities, if they might need work, they might need any kind of that, make sure that's utilized as well, right? Those opportunities are given. It's a crazy situation where I think both sides are confused. Both sides want to make sure they do the right thing, but both sides are reluctant, and it's tough, right?
Yeah. Well, that history, I think, is the big issue, why there's a lack of trust. So there wasn't the communication before for development. You just come in and do whatever, and then these communities would be suffering from it.
Right.
And not just like from the food aspect, but they've, a lot of them have a deep connection to the forest, like it's
spiritual,
their family,
must be, right?
Yeah. So all of a sudden their trees are gone, and it's like, their uncles passed away and their aunts passed away or something. So, now that there is the conversation at least happening, I see things, I see becoming a little brighter in the future. Like, I guess people have a misconception that all Aboriginal people are against development of any kind. And they just want the grass and the forest and everything to be left alone and pure for nature. So, and that's not really true. Throughout most of Aboriginal history, they were constantly developing the land. People didn't know this, but like in the east or in the west coast, the nations along the coast would build up rocks in bay areas, and people didn't know why. Like for a long time, when the first Europeans went there and saw these areas, they thought it was a natural formation.
Right.
But they learned in time from the elders in the communities nearby that no, they built these little ecosystems so that they would attract more shellfish.
Oh, okay. That's
than they normally would, like if it was just a flat, ocean bed there.
Farming the ocean in a sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Fire was a huge development tool.
That's a good one, actually. I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, they would, like the Blackfeet, they were, actually, they don't call themselves Blackfeet. That was the name given to them by Cree people, because the Blackfoot people would burn the plains to expand the buffalo range, and they'd get their feet black, right? But even up north, people, the Cree people, for example, would burn the forests,
right,
and clean them up, and they'd know when to burn,
right,
in the early spring or the late fall,
right.
So the wildfires wouldn't get out of control, so
right.
they'd have controlled burning. And they found that once they cleaned up the forest, there'd be new growth. It would attract all sorts of animals and increase biodiversity, increase animal populations. So it's easier for them to hunt.
Right.
So, the Aboriginal culture is not like leave the land alone and let it do its thing. The Aboriginal culture is work with the land in balance. So just take what you need. Don't get greedy. But feel free to go, collect nature's bounty. It's a gift for you.
And give back too, right?
That's exactly.
We've only got one planet, right? We've got to make sure we manage it right the first time. As soon as there's a book I'm reading right now, where he's it's Aldo Leopold. It's called A Sand County Almanac. Awesome book, really good. Aldo Leopold was a conservationist forester in the United States in the early 1900s to 1950. I think 1950, 1960 he died. He was a poet as well, and he wrote this awesome book. And anyways, one little excerpt I read from it the other day was he was talking about in Germany there's a mountain where one side of the slope is oaks and one side of the slope is pine, and on the side with the oaks that the soil was rich and plentiful, and the humus there was thick, so there's lots of biodegradable material in there, so lots of richness and matter and biomatter there, right? Whereas on the pine side, and the way he describes it is it didn't make sense that the pine should be there, and I guess he did some investigation. It turns out that 500-600 years before that, they had cultivated that whole side of the mountain, and it was oaks before that, and they cultivated it, and they did agriculture, and they consumed up the soil. Basically, the soil was all the biomatter and all the bacteria, all the minuscule bacteria that can't be replenished, was totally sucked dry out of that side of the mountain, right? And then they replanted pine afterwards, and the pine took place because pine likes nutrient poor dry sites, so it worked okay for the pine, right? But something like that, where you're destroying the soil in an area to a detrimental point where it's not going to come back, that's horrible. Obviously, I don't think anybody wants that, right? And that's not what forest companies are doing at all, but things happen, right? Like erosion, there's things that happen, and we're trying to manage for those things, but we want to make sure that it's there for future generations, and the Aboriginal community wants the same thing. So
how would the forest company live in the future if there's no more trees in the present, right?
Longevity, right? Like
exactly.
Like I said, the forest management is timber is like wood is a tool by which we can manage the forest for people, because if we didn't manage the forest, it would just be a free-for-all, and everybody be cutting down what they want, and there'd be no regeneration, there would be that depletion of forest land, and that's a huge problem, right? We'd see massive decrease in animal biodiversity and insect biodiversity and everything, and that just it would carry on, right? So nobody wants that. We all want to work together, and I think it's the confusion that people think that we're coming from different places, right? We think that, well, the Aboriginal community wants this, and the industry wants profit, and it's like, well, no, we want the same stuff. We're all people. We all agree that trees are beautiful, and we want deer to be around, and we want the pileated woodpecker to be around. We want these things to exist, but instead we're kind of stuck in our pinholes and not really communicating. And
the history again,
and the history, it's and that's horrifying, right? Like I can't imagine what that must be like to grow up in a family that's have intergenerational trauma like that, right? Like that's.
It leaves you very mistrustful of people coming from outside the communities, like a forest company. Yeah.
I know, and it's hard to blame them for being closed off, right?
Well, a lot of companies communities are, I think, changing, and like the forest industry is changing. Working together, I think, is happening more and more. A lot of communities want to work with forestry,
right? Well, it's an industry that's in their neighborhood, right?
Exactly.
Why not become a part of it?
So they don't have to move away. They can work in their communities, and then instead of just having it, happen to them, like if trees getting cut down, then at least they're involved and they have a say. And I think that's just that's the key right there, is that they just wanted to have a say.
Yeah.
That's fine. If you need to, everybody needs trees, and everybody has a right to access, the bounty of the earth to live. We just want to have, I think a lot of the communities just want to make sure, like you're saying with a lot of the forestry companies are saying, they just want to do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
In a sustainable way. And then also in a culturally respectful way. Yeah. So that, they don't lose their medicines. They don't lose their cultural sites. And I think that's all happening right now. And, there's going to be mistakes as we go, but as long as there's that patience and that willingness to just, yesterday was a bad day, but I'm sorry. Let's try and work things for the better here and see how we can, both get some benefit.
And both sides can, right? There's no reason why it can't be a win-win for both sides, right? It's just need open communication, like any good marriage, right?
That's right.
You need to explain what's going on, right? You can't just expect it to go away. Right. Oh, that's fun.
Maybe some counseling once in a while.
But a mediator is good sometimes. If someone's out of hand, for sure. That's right. Funny. Well, could you imagine if we had more Aboriginal individuals that were coming into forestry and getting involved, and we had that knowledge, that Aboriginal knowledge, that traditional knowledge in the industry itself? Could you imagine the changes that would make, right? Like if there's somebody out there, anybody out there that feels strongly about forest being around, about environment, about watersheds, about conservation and all these things, like and you're deep rooted in Aboriginal culture, then I implore you to jump on board, right? Like go to NAIT, get your tech degree in forestry, or go to the U of A and get your bachelor's degree in forestry, and come into the industry and start showing people these things. Because if we can do this from the inside, then that's gonna make changes drastic, right? Because then it becomes common knowledge, and then it becomes standard practice to consult with Aboriginal communities, right? Rather than it being like, oh, I have to go talk to the Aboriginal community and like our communication isn't great and we get confused. We're talking about different things. We think we're coming from different places, and we don't want that, right? I think both sides want communication to work, and it's funny how we can get caught up in our own minds, especially with, like you said, intergenerational trauma like that, right? Like you can't. And on our side as foresters, we need to be. This is why I wanted to have you on, right? I wanted to explain to the professionals out there, as well as public, the more people that know, the better, that this is what's going on. It's not personal. Don't, like, if you're a forester and you're a land manager and you go to Aboriginal community and they, they're passive, they don't want to talk to you or whatever, don't take that as personal slight. It's not you. It's the intergenerational mistrust, and and it's hard to. I can't imagine trying to regain that trust, right? So,
and I think the forestry industry can do a lot to, I guess, change what has happened from history. So instead of in the past where a lot of things were done to take away the culture, take away the, people's way of life. Maybe forestry can ask the question now, well, what can we do to help promote this culture now, to help bring it back? What can we do for reconciliation now?
Absolutely,
like get some emails out to the staff about some articles on reconciliation, or a lot of people are doing Indigenous training, so they would invite community members and elders to come meet with them and then learn how to build a rattle and why that's so important and what's the significance of that, or to build a drum, or to go out to the bush with them and have a sweat with them and then learn the importance of that. That would all start helping to a cultural resurgence within these communities. And then also an understanding within the forestry industry of, this is what they're actually about, and deconstruct a lot of the myths that we hear from media and, a lot of places. And also, when you do that, then you can also have like if if companies were putting money into culture, and to make their staff more like aware of the history, it would become a safer place for Indigenous people to work.
Yeah.
Then as well, so there'd be a lot of benefits there, and and then easier to get into work with to make partnerships with the communities, to develop and harvest some timber and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of bonuses, I think, a lot of opportunities in this time, right now.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly it, right? Like I could imagine if it became common practice for forest professionals to recognize, if they knew all the medicine plants, right, or at least a good deal of them, and knew where, because we know, right, we're out there every day looking at it and walking through it and everything, right, and to know what to recognize would be a huge first step towards, if everyone's thinking that way, and like I don't know, I don't even know what they would be. I honestly don't know. I can't say I know any of them, right?
Well,
like I know
there's a lot.
I know willow,
hundreds of medicines out there.
I'm sure everything does, right? Like I know little things.
Yeah,
like I know willow. Willow has what is it? It's what's in aspirin?
For like
acetylsalicylic. Acetylsalicylic acid is in willow, and I think actually poplar buds as well. And like, so you can boil up some willow bark, I think it is, or some poplar buds, and breathe in that, or drink it as a tea or something like that, and you have headache relief or pain relief, right? And that's the one I know. I've actually used it once when I was in junior forest wardens when I was a kid, and I remember we were in Shunda Creek Hostel down by Nordegg, and we were doing some ice climbing and some what is it called again? The dog sledding, but with skis. Oh man,
that's a new one for me. Sounds pretty fun.
It's on the tip of my tongue, but yeah, basically you have two dogs. They strap you up to a harness, right, and then they just mush, right, and you go. And it's ski-juring. Ski-juring is what it's called, yeah. And we did that. We checked that out, and I got a crazy headache. And I was only like 12 or 13, right? So crazy headache was probably a minor headache, but to me it was the end of the world, right? So it's in Nordegg. It's a town of like 100 people. There was nothing open. Couldn't get medicine, and one of the women there, she knows a lot about that kind of stuff, right? And she said, well, there's a giant poplar tree right there. Go pick the buds, throw it in a pot, breathe in the steam. You'll be good to go. And I was like, well, that sounds stupid, but it turns out it wasn't. I did it, and it worked. It worked wonders. It's actually pretty amazing. So, those kind of, it's real, right? Those. Where do you think medicines come from, right? Like not you, but I'm saying the public, right? Like it all comes from the natural world at some point. Yeah. So. In the boreal forest, in the forest we have here in Canada, or the majority of the forest is boreal forest. There's a lot going on there that even we as foresters might not recognize, because that's not our focus, right? Our focus is on productivity and tree growth and maybe wetlands and conservation of animals and mammals and big stuff that we can see, right? But we're not looking for the small little forb in the bottom of the canopy that we're stepping on, right? We don't. So there's lots of information to be had, right?
And I'm just thinking right now of this time I was at a Sundance, and so we were cutting down a tree to put in the middle of the arbor. It's a tree of life that gets placed in the middle of the area where everybody dances. And I remember an elder spending a long time saying a prayer to the tree and offering tobacco.
Right.
And thanking the tree for giving up its life for us to Sundance with it. Yeah. And I just wonder if the forest industry would ever get to
that point
where, you're actually thanking the tree. Thank you for helping us out, Yeah. And maybe even if you have big enough partnerships with communities that are, very culturally inclined, and to have opening ceremonies when you're about to do some work in the season to do a ceremony.
And if we had Aboriginal crews, maybe we could do that,
exactly.
Right? Like it's interesting.
Say thank you to the earth and the trees for all that they give
for sure
for us.
We're sitting on in a wooden room with a wooden desk and all these things, right? It's
a lot to be grateful for,
Well, it's interesting that perspective, right? Like I look at a tree and I find a tree beautiful, and it's majestic in that it's 100 years old, and yeah, like sometimes you go, yeah, I feel kind of bad for cutting this down. It is an old being that's been on this planet. It went through World War I, World War II, the Depression. It went through all kinds of different stuff, and here I am just cutting it down to make 2x4s, right? It seems kind of weird, but when you start to understand, like for me, when I start to understand kind of the regeneration process of trees and how they're, like, for example, say I cut down a tree and you could have a sapling that's the same tree and it just starts popping right up out of the stump, right? And it's the same genetics, it's the exact same tree. It's just now it's small again, right? It's kind of like a phoenix in a way. You know, the phoenix that it gets old and it burns and it rises again from the ashes. It's kind of like that in a way, right? But it's a totally different perspective that I have from. I don't see the tree myself as like having a soul or something like that. I mean, there is some kind of majestic feeling you get when you're out in the woods with nature, and it's silence and you can hear the birds chirping maybe a little bit and wind. Yeah. And it's very healing. It's super healing. And I wouldn't be in this industry if it wasn't that way. Right. Yeah. And I definitely have a deep connection to the woods, but it's not spiritual and culturally ingrained the way that it is in Indigenous culture, right? Like I feel that myself because my parents taught me, and we've spent a lot of time out there, and people can appreciate the outdoors. But for a culture that has been firmly ingrained or stuck in not stuck, but you know, they live their whole lives in and around and with the forest, right? It's literally, it's not that it's, oh, I love the outdoors. It's no, like what's the outdoors? Everything is like, everything's the outdoors, right? Like it's the whole, it's their family. It takes
care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's responsible for the food you eat and everything, right?
Yeah. They would, you know, traditionally, Aboriginal cultures, the trees are alive. No different than the moose or the deer or people or the fish or the bird. Even the stones are part of creation and have a spirit in them and they're alive. Yeah. Basically everything, you know, traditionally speaking, you know, I'm not saying you'd find some First Nations person on the street and expect them to believe this. You know, the truth is
that's the tradition. Yeah.
But that's the traditional beliefs. Yeah. Everything is alive and everything's in a cycle of, like everything's moving. Yeah. So the trees are in a cycle of living and dying. Right. So like in the Northwest coast cultures, you know, along BC with all the totem poles. Right. You know, in our culture, we'd see these totem poles and want to take them and put them in a preserved glass and look at them for, you know, 1,000 years.
You go to Vancouver, right? And they have a museum like that.
Well, exactly.
The University of Victoria, I think, or Vancouver, one of them has that big totem pole section, right? And they got these massive, gorgeous totem poles, right? And they're just sitting in a glass building.
Yeah, and, you know, that's fine, too. You know, I love looking at the beautiful art and the history, and you know, I can appreciate that too.
Could you imagine seeing that in the woods, stumbling across it? Like
some people, well, and that's what a lot of people on the coast, like Aboriginal people on the coast, would think, like that needs to be in the bush. It feels like it. They feel like that tree, that totem pole is suffocating because it can't go back to the earth. Yeah. So they see, even though I spent all this time and it's beautiful and it's been there forever, you know, and created this work of art, it's meant to be destroyed and go back to the earth, you know.
That's an interesting concept too, because I mean, it's one of those things where like you want to protect the culture. Yeah. And the culture would be like, we'll bring it in a museum, we'll put it in this museum, we'll look at it and it'll be good, and we'll read something about it and we'll move on. Yeah. But it being like, but then there's the opposite of, if we're going to respect the culture and leave it alone and not bring it to the museum, we may lose that opportunity to learn from it. Right, and it's one of those weird balances. There's no right answer. It's just that it
is what it is.
It is what it is, right?
Let people make more, and then there'll be lots more to see. Maybe.
I suppose, right? Like it's a weird one. It's one of those weird. There's no right or wrong answer. It just is what it is, and it's
different perspective, different worldview. Yeah. Has to be kind of, you know, no one has to say, okay, you're, you know, I have to agree with your worldview. No.
Yeah. Could you imagine if that was the case, man?
Well, we'd be losing out on a lot.
Oh,
I think.
No kidding.
I mean, just look at our food alone. If we didn't have
the
diversity of thought.
Eating hot dogs and macaroni every day.
Dinners would be. Yeah.
Jesus, yeah. No, yeah, it's definitely important, right? Biodiversity of culture, right? Exactly. We want that around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, it's important. Yeah, it's amazing how complex and convoluted and just different everything is, right? All these subjects, they're all interrelated, but there's there's so much going on. It blows my mind. It's yeah. Well, I had one more question.
Sure.
Kind of just to kind of sum things up so that this isn't just an interesting hour long. We're an hour in, by the way, so it flies by. It goes by quick. So just to kind of sum things up, what do you think are some of the first steps towards mending these relationships and creating a culture of an interculture where both sides can relate and find a safe place to meet and to talk and to get this information out there so nothing's lost in the future? What do you think the first steps are to kind of getting to that point? I mean, I realized, like you were saying earlier, it seems like it's moving that direction. What do you think that people out there today can do to help?
Well, I think a lot of good work was done through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's brought a lot of voices out, a lot of people's truth out, and to just take the time to try and understand what that truth is, I think is the important first step.
Ask questions.
People can take. Yeah, just understanding that history is so important, because understanding where people were is a good way to understand where people are now. So realizing, okay, yes, there might be a lot of Aboriginal people in jail and living on the street, but that happened because of a lot of racist government policy.
Yeah. It's as simple as that. It was racist.
Is, yeah.
No, totally. I totally agree. It was racist policy. It was ignorant. It was misinformed, right? And it was, and I'm glad that we're I feel like we're hopefully out of that era, and we're kind of moving towards more consideration and more more hopefully just laws and regulations, right? I would hope.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just hope that learning, having that knowledge will lead to some empathy, and understanding and some openness. So, we can give some people a chance, instead of writing people off right away, maybe look a little deeper, dig a little deeper, see how you can support some people. It might be giving them an opportunity, for work, or it might just be having some extra patience if, they're having if you're in the middle of a meeting and they're yelling at you about something that you had nothing to do with, maybe you can at least take a step back and think, well, if I was in their situation, and this happened to my family and my community, how would I feel?
Yeah.
And
I can't imagine, right? Like trying to grow up with that kind of background, right? Like I could imagine somebody like a youth, like an Aboriginal youth, coming in and being taught by another culture, and not having trust for that culture and not having patience for that culture and all those things, and then the teaching culture is trying to, or the common culture, the government and stuff like that, they don't have the patience because they think, well, they don't care. No, it's a weird, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I could see how somebody of Aboriginal culture might feel animosity towards the governing body and everybody else, and how it would take a lot of time to break through that barrier and to get them to accept that this person's not trying to burn you, this person is trying to help you, like, open up. But even then, there's a lot of trauma for them. They have a lot going on in their lives, and it's crazy to think about.
I've heard some elders just say that their experiences in their life they can never get over. And most of it, and they're not talking about residential schools particularly, a lot of it is talking about what they've done to people that they love, and all that trauma too. And they said they're probably never going to be able to get over it, and it's probably always going to be stinging them in the back of their mind.
Yeah.
But at least they can do work now to help the next generation.
Yeah.
So to help make sure that their children and their children's children don't go through the same suffering.
Yeah.
So
it's so sad, right? Like I don't think most people can relate to what's going on there, right? Like I can't even fathom that kind of trauma. It's wild to think about.
Yeah. And there's like you said, with going to the powwow, I think that's another good opportunity to just come and experience some of the more beautiful aspects of the culture, the fun parts, the energetic parts, you know, or you can even, if you like, go to a friendship center, and see what they got going on. Maybe you can go to a feast and try and meet some people, and all this work will help break down the narrative, I think, that we've built around Aboriginal people in Canada, and help move things in a better place, where we're working as neighbors. That was the intent of the original treaties, was to work as neighbors, help each other out. If someone needs a cup of sugar, always come and I'll borrow a cup of sugar from you, and then you can borrow my hammer when you need it. Like, living together and help each other instead of, fighting and kidnapping kids and kicking fences over and
whatever,
to undo what happened in the past. And we understand that, and then we can make sure it doesn't happen again, learn from the past to make a bright future, and then everything will get better from there. I think a lot of we'll have a safer country. We'll have more development, economic opportunities if we're working together, all on the same team, building trust with each other. We'll have, more knowledge instead of just trying to focus on one type of knowledge. We can have space for diversity of thinking.
Yeah.
And who knows what kind of innovation that will bring to the country.
As soon as we become involved and we truly embrace being multicultural, right? Mm-hmm. Like, people like to say that they say Canada's a collage of cultures, right? And it really is. Like, that's and why not allow the Aboriginal part of that collage to take a bigger role, right? Exactly. Like, it's such a major component of our history.
Well, and it's who we are. We are a Métis nation. Canada is its root is the First Nations word. Like our rivers, like Saskatchewan, that's a First Nation word. Manitoba, First Nation word. And even just some philosophers are saying how the fact that Canadians are known to be so nice and want to just talk and are not quick to pulling a gun and being violent and that kind of thing. Has its roots. Well, that's exactly like the First Nation cultures were in Canada. Very open,
very friendly,
and prided negotiation.
And I'm looking forward to the day when I think like we're going in the right direction, and like hopefully we can really open up those doors and make it, instead of being us and them, it's us. It's just all us.
We're brothers and sisters. Exactly.
Exactly.
Living together.
Let's do it all together, right? For sure. That's awesome.
Kumbaya.
Kumbaya. Exactly. Awesome. Well, we did over an hour. This is I think we could do another 2 hours if you wanted to.
Probably.
And I think if you're willing to, like, anytime in the future,
sure,
let me know. Come back on, just shoot me a text. You got my number now, and just let's and we can sit down and talk about anything you're interested in.
If your listeners have any questions, definitely I encourage them to just ask, and we can always come back and have more discussion and clarify things and as they evolve.
Exactly. So if anyone does have any questions, you can direct them to me, and when I get enough, I'll bring Mike back on, and we'll have a real conversation. Or if you really want an answer right now, if this is really something that's bothering you, email me. I'll email Mike, and you guys can get hooked up maybe, or depending on what the situation is. But because these questions need to be answered, right? We want the information out there. We want everyone to be informed. We want, like I said in one of my first podcasts, we want a more informed populace, right? People the more people that know, the less animosity there's going to be because people fear the things they don't understand, right?
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that people don't have to fear any of these things, whether it's forestry, whether it's like Aboriginal culture, whether it's whatever it is. We want to make sure that all these things are understood and cooperating, right?
Yeah.
Working together.
That's right.
We're neighbors.
Yeah.
It's us.
Yeah.
Anyways, awesome. So, yeah, that's it, guys. I think that'll be good for now. Thanks for listening again. Yeah, please rate and review. That's going to help get the word out there. Share it with your friends, with your family. Get it out there. We need this information out there. It's important for people to know. So if you guys want to get a hold of me, you can send me an email at yourforestpodcast@gmail.com, and I will answer any and all questions there. And if they're geared towards Mike, then I will send them his way, and we'll get the right answer. Maybe we'll bring him back on if we got enough. So thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next time.